Welcome to Beyond the Build, where we go beyond the construction site and discuss the people, policies, and initiatives that shape our industry and communities. This podcast is produced in partnership with Associated Builders and Contractors North Florida and Florida Construction News. I'm your host, Kelvin Enfinger, and today I'm joined by Tyson Lamond, Chief Operating Officer of American Magic. Tyson brings over 16 years of experience at the highest level of competitive sailing, where he's led operations, logistics, and performance of one of the most advanced teams in the sport. He's known for building strong teams, solving complex problems, and delivering results in a high-pressure, high-performance environment. Tyson is passionate about innovation, leadership, team building, and putting Pensacola on the map as a high-performance sailing location. Tyson, welcome to the podcast.
Mate, thank you so much for having me today. It's interesting, I get invited on various podcasts, but I've got to say this will be my first construction podcast. But I feel very fortunate to be here. As you say, I'm very passionate about building teams, and I think there's a lot of natural synergies between what we do here and the construction game. And let's be honest, every day when we all wake up and go to work, we're all solving problems. And so I geek out a little bit on how do you best solve problems and get the best out of the people within your organization.
We're going to do the best we can to figure out what the crossover between the high-performance sailing team and the construction industry is today. But it's all about team building and leading people in our organizations the very best way we can. So I'm looking forward to your insights and hearing more from you about your background. So I want to talk about what it takes to build and lead a world-class team and why a global organization like American Magic would choose Pensacola. But before we get into that, I want you to tell the listeners a little bit about your background and how you got into sailing.
When I think about that, I mean, it's like everybody gets into sport. You all jump into a sport as a kid because it's a passion of somebody around you. And they always say in business, you're influenced by the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And when I think about the sport of sailing, my father was very into sailing and rugby. I grew up in Adelaide, Australia. And so I started sailing from a young age and then got to a point that I was like, okay, well, as most teenagers do, it's like you need to choose one sport. And my dad said to me, I love watching you play rugby, but a rugby career is quite short. And then, we took on sailing, and I think about my journey. I'm like, most other kids when they're 16, 17, 18, they all love their sport, but they don't know if their sport can take them through life. And I was very fortunate to take some quite big risks in my younger years and basically say, okay, I'm going to take this on as a career. And I look back now, I left Australia nearly 23 years ago. And I've turned something that literally started off as a Saturday going racing with my brother to racing at the highest level of our sport to now, running the front office of a professional sporting organization. And when I look back at my journey, I think I didn't start any different to any of the local kids around here. Okay. And, clearly I had some skills, but I genuinely think the biggest thing is showing up every day and showing up with a good attitude and treating people the way you want to be treated. I say this all the time, certainly a lot locally here in Pensacola, because I'm very passionate about this, is it's our job to give people a chance because somebody gave all of us a chance. And I think back in my early years, I never would think about how much money I'd get paid to go sailing on any race boat. I was just, my first few years, I would go sailing as many days as I could and meet as many people, because everyone we meet in this world, whether we meet them on a building site, in a boardroom or on a sailboat, you always pick up that one little nugget that makes you a better person. And one thing that I feel so fortunate about, coming from a sporting background and obviously in a sporting industry, is everybody needs to be coachable. And I think that's one big transition that we take over to the business side of, American Magic Services is ultimately, we're a business now, and we need to make sure that, when the financials come through at the end of the month, the rubber meets the road. But we're also quite candid with each other on the floor here because we're used to that. Because in a sporting team, on Monday morning, you got wins and losses that you need to report about. And I think businesses need to be the same, and you need to hold people accountable, and you need to be able to say, okay, yep, this is what we did great, but this is also what we did bad. And people need to be able to take that on. And that's something that I'm quite passionate about, because of, obviously, the world is changing a lot, and people don't like to be told when they're wrong. But that's human nature. Nobody gets it perfect every single day. So, I think back to certainly, my journey, and then our organization's journey in Pensacola, and there's just been so many amazing people involved along the way. And I feel fortunate that, so many of them are still close to me to this day, but they've all done their own little piece to mold and help, create what we have today.
So I got to assume that choosing Salem was a little bit easier on the body than rugby, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love the physical aspect of, sport. I never played football, but I love watching American football because it reminds me a little bit of rugby. It's like when you're in a team sport like that, and it's like a bicycle chain, okay? You miss one link in that chain, your bike ain't going anywhere. When you're in a physical team sport like that, if you're not willing to put your body on the line for your teammate right next to you, you've got nothing. And I think about that in business so often, and whether it be here or whether it be on, a building site like you guys are, everybody has to be all in to work as a team. And I try to push that every single day here. And, everybody operates differently. But I think that is something that's huge in life. And that's why I believe so strongly in team sports for kids. I was very fortunate that majority of the sports I did were team sports, and I think people need to play in a team, and they need to learn to function in a team. And certainly, whenever I get a CV across my desk, if it's got something in the CV about a high level of team sport, well, I always move that higher up the deck, because I genuinely know that those people are able to work with other people.
I love the phrase team sport. It's used in construction sometimes because, the collaboration between general contractors and subcontractors, everybody's doing their part as a team to make a project move along. So I hear that phrase used from time to time, that construction is one of the greatest team sports in the world. And I laugh about it, but it is kind of a team sport where we all come together. I love you sharing about sailing as a child, and now you're living out your dream. That's probably a little bit more interesting than me telling my story about growing up in construction and being in construction today.
But I think it's crazy, and everybody's got it through their own eyes, shall we say. If you had said to me 22 years ago today that, I'd be living in Pensacola, Florida, and have 3 kids, and, we'd have this permanent facility here, and would have the business, and would have the sailing teams, and, would have all the performance projects we are doing, I would have said, no way. I would have never dreamed it would end up like this. But I think that's what's cool about life. If you wake up in the morning and you're willing to work hard, and you're willing to work with people, and ultimately do a good job, and make good decisions that are not only good decisions for an organization, but good decisions for your teammates within that organization, I think the sky's the limit. And I think that's the beauty, certainly, of the United States, is there are so many amazing opportunities out there for people that are willing to work hard at it. And I think, whether it be in a sailing team, in the building industry, I mean, people can make great careers, but they got to do it for themselves, and they got to show up every single day, and they got to show up with a good attitude and a can-do attitude. And I genuinely believe that, the next person, whether their dream is to run an electrical company, or to run a project management company, or to run a carpentry crew, they can do it, but you have to be consistent. And I think that's, one of the troubles that lots of organizations find hiring now is okay, accountability. Not everybody is used to that. And, not everybody wants to show up every day and put their best foot forward. And so I think that's on all of us, as local leaders, to make sure that we're educating the people that we bring into our organizations what the non-negotiables are. Okay. And we need to set a platform that people want to come into every day, and they want to learn, and they want to get better, because that's what's going to make the whole community better, and not just our organization or your organization.
Absolutely love it. We're going to come back to it, but you've mentioned Pensacola a few times, and, full circle, finding yourself at this point in your life in Pensacola. Let's talk about that for a minute. So why Pensacola? The move from New York, here you guys are, we're proud to have you. New facility, up and running. What made the decisions leading up to that?
Well, this is a long one, but let's dive straight into it. So fundamentally, in 2018, when this team was founded, we knew that we needed somewhere to train over winter. And originally, a few of us did a trip down to Key West, Florida. And Key West is known in our industry as a great sailing location. When we got there, there was great sailing conditions. There was challenges logistically around the site and, within the local community. At the same time, one of our team principals, Doug DeVos, happened to connect up with Dr. Andrews from Andrews Institute here. Now, they have a history of sailing against each other and partnering together on a sports team, with Doug's family in the early 2000s. And Doc Andrews said, why don't you come down to Pensacola and have a look? So then me and two others came down to Pensacola and we went out on Pensacola Bay with Tom Pace from the Pensacola Yacht Club. And we were like, oh my God, this is amazing. Wow. Great sailing conditions, empty bay. And we're like, okay, how do we make it happen? They're like, oh, there's no really to put, a team. So where do you set up here? At the time, we had Mayor Ashton Hayward in town. And Ashton was like, well, let's set you up at the port. We'll get you guys sailing and we can get all this going. And literally it moved so quickly and one thing went to another. And next thing we knew, I was telling my wife we were going to Pensacola. And I laugh about this now, but she's from Colorado. And she was like, Pensacola, where? Florida. And she's like, oh, it's in the Panhandle. And she's like, oh, I've never been there, but I've been to Texas, so I'm sure it's brown beaches. And I have to say, she wasn't super excited. And I actually had a lunch today with a couple of developers, and I was telling them the story of the first time we went down Pensacola Beach on a coach, and everyone was just mind blown at this amazing beach and just like, oh my God, we've really landed it here. And, that's our story. And next thing you know, we're here training. And at that point in AC36, we ran the Snowbird program where we would do the winter here and then go up to New England, do the summer and come back. And we quickly worked out that was a very, very, very inefficient way to run an organization. If you're spending 6 weeks packing up and moving families. And at that point, we're probably traveling with 65, 70 people up and down the East Coast. And we said at the start of 2022, we weren't going to do that. And so we went back to, okay, let's just triple check and make sure we're in the right place. And I went to 3 locations to look where were we going to set up long term. And obviously Pensacola was one of them, and the other 2 were on the West Coast. And at that time, DC wasn't elected, but I sat down with him. And also I met with local city staff and the port, and they were like, we'll do whatever we can, but we want you guys to come back here long term. And I think that is the mentality that we've had in Pensacola from day dot. It's like this local community that everyone wants to lift each other up and help grow. And I think that's what's so unique. And so we committed to coming back, and within 12 months we'd had an agreement with the port to come here long term. And so at that point, it was like, okay, how do we do this? And, I have to take my hat off to Mayor DC Reeves because his passion for growing this city is infectious. And, the amount of trips he does to Tallahassee, to DC, to try bring new opportunities to this community is absolutely transformational for this region. And without him doing that, there's no way that we would be sitting here today in this amazing facility that we've built here in Pensacola. There is no way that, you'd have the Hard Rock coming down to Pensacola, the new restaurants popping up downtown, this amazing, Palafox refurb. Like these things don't happen without, those drivers in communities that are pushing them. And so, like, I genuinely feel so thankful to him for his vision, not only in our team, but in the community and in what organizations like us do to the community. And then we got to the point, it's like, okay, well, we've built a lot of bases around the country and we think we know everything about building bases, but now we've got to build, this long-term manufacturing facility. And I have to say, it started off a little bit rocky, and probably 6 months into the project, we got connected up with the guys at Greenheart. And the relationship from when we first were dealing with Randy and Ryan, and then when Randy ditched us and handed us over to Pat and Danny and Tanner, was absolutely amazing. And all of them I look at now, and everyone in the Greenheart family as close friends, because genuinely I think that Pat and Danny lost a lot of hair and with the project with us, but I genuinely think it was so enjoyable. I guess one thing about us coming from a sporting organization that's always developing is every single day we're trying to make things better. And I used to laugh so much. You'd come in and those guys are, they've been building buildings for a long time, probably longer than I've been alive with Pat. And they would
For
have these
sure.
amazing Gantt charts on the wall. And I'd walk in and say, Pat, we've come up with another great idea. Where do we put it in? But it goes back to something I said at the start, Kelvin. And it's just that can-do attitude and being willing to work with people. And it is just so important. It doesn't matter if you're at the checkout at Publix, or you're stripping sheets on a building site, or you're racing a sailboat. You have to be able to work with people and create relationships. And these are the things that, changes people's lives. And, the relationships that we've built in Pensacola and the people we have met in Pensacola have just been absolutely amazing. And we are just so thankful to be here. And, I look forward to the next 20 years here in Pensacola and growing this organization out and watching my kids go through the local school districts into the local universities and them grow as well.
Appreciate you sharing the importance of community leadership as well as business leadership. And we had an opportunity to kind of see firsthand what you guys' operation was all about and what that was going to mean to Pensacola. But every listener may not understand the impact that American Magic is going to have, putting Pensacola, on the map, to have a team here that's competing on the world stage. So if you would, just in your words, tell the listeners what kind of impact this is going to have locally for Pensacola long term.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I think about it and when people see, the American Magic name or the logo in the city, they think about the race team, which everyone's always going to think about the race team. But we are so much more than a race team. For me, we are, at high-end, composite manufacturing and innovation and technology center that we're going to create opportunities all across the board. And when I say that, I genuinely mean that because it's the opportunities for Pensacola Airport, it's the opportunities for the new Tristan Hotel, it's the opportunity for all the new bars on Palafox, it's the opportunity for the UWF and Pensacola State and Children's Home Society, people that come and work for us because our organization is so broad. And whether we're building aerospace parts, for large space companies or we're bringing boats here for high performance sailing events, or we're project managing. We've announced recently that we're the SailGP USA training facility for the next 5 years. That guarantees 110 days of sailing annually for 14 teams from all around the globe, coming to Pensacola, Florida, meeting the local kids, eating in the local restaurants and staying in the local hotels. So I think it's so much more than just the race team. And I think that's something that, people are learning really quickly about our organization is obviously there's one thing you see on the TV, but there's the undercurrents of what goes on. And you think about it like a building site analogy, like nobody knows when you're putting the foundations in and when the slab's going in, but before you know it, the walls are going on and they're like, oh shit, nothing's happened for 6 months, but now the building's going up quick. And I know that's your world that you live in, Kelvin, and you see that every day, but the average person driving past that site for 4 months has probably been bagging you that nothing's happening. And I think so much about that with our team. Like there are so many amazing stories in this facility every single day. We've now got 18 local full-time hires. We're absolutely committing to growing that, along with, all of our internationals that we relocated here. We talked about it a little bit at the start, but, I'm so passionate about community partnerships. We could not grow the workforce as we are if it wasn't for, the University of West Florida, Pensacola State College, Children's Home Society. These are all areas that are the pipeline for the next generation, of American Magic, whether it be, composite manufacturing technicians, project managers, design engineers, fluid dynamic, whatever it may be across the board. These things just do not happen if we don't have a local pipeline. And so we're all in right now on developing that. And I just feel so thankful because there's so many people in this community doing an amazing job setting up these programs that literally we were able to slip in on.
I was really impressed to see how quickly you guys moved on partnerships with the university. and the college and just working in the community and already finding ways to give back and become entrenched into the fabric of the community to get people engaged in what you were doing to train up that next generation of workforce. And so you hit on this, excuse me, you hit on this a little bit whenever we first started talking about team building and what it means to lead an organization. And so I want to dive back into that if we can. And I want to talk about, because you're leading athletes, we're leading skilled workforce in the construction industry. But no matter what you do in life, you're going to have different skill sets. You're going to have different personalities. And so from your perspective, how do you guys try to align those different personalities on a high performance team like you're operating?
I think it all goes back to one thing. Everybody has a why. Okay? Everybody has that one reason why they're there. And it doesn't matter if you're a dual Olympic gold medalist going out and racing in another America's Cup and thinking, shit, this might be my last one. That's my why. Or if you're an apprentice carpenter, the first day on the building site that is hoping to save up to buy a new truck, that's his why. Or if you're somebody that just had a second baby and trying to get up to the next level, that's their why. Every single person has their why. And what's really important for me is spending time and sitting down with people and communicating and understanding a little bit about them. What is their family? What are they into? What do their weekends look like? And I think so much about it is, we're all human beings and we all make mistakes. And I think the worst leaders are the ones that always want to cover up the mistakes they make. And I'm always very candid. I always say, I'll make the most mistakes around this organization because unfortunately I have to make the most decisions. But, I don't have any issue with going down to the floor and saying, look, guys, that was a mistake and I'll put my hand up for it, but this is what we're doing. And I think that's really, really important in an organization. And what I love within organizations is watching somebody take an opportunity and turn it into a life. And when I say that, it's like, I've got one worker down here, actually. He started with us in 2022, and we hired him to basically fill a void when we sent a bunch of people to Barcelona to do a project. We need another set of hands. We said, look, we'll hire you for 2 weeks. Now, he could have come in for that 2 weeks and floated through the days, and we would have let him go at the end of the 2 weeks, and we would have, you'd never remember him. But he came in with such good energy, did such a good job. He's still sitting here working for American Magic today. We're 4 years later, and he's, a local out within the community. And we didn't do that for him. We opened the door for him. We created the opportunity. We got to know him and understand him and work out within our organization where could he excel. But he needed to show up every day. And I love more than anything seeing people that dig in and are successful. And, as I say to everybody that comes in here, I'm going to give you all the opportunities in the world that I can possibly give you, but it's up to you to make it happen. And I think it doesn't matter if you're a football team or you're a first day carpenter on the side or you're racing in the America's Cup or racing for the Olympics. Ultimately, when you get that opportunity, you need to make the most of that opportunity. You need to be respectful to your teammates. You need to make sure that, you're holding yourself to the high standard. You need to make sure that, you're showing up on time, you're doing a good job, and you're doing all the 1% as well. And if you do that every single day, the sky is the limit. And that's what I love about large organizations is once you get an organization that is set up like that ultimately jobs for people like me is giving people an opportunity and making sure that you're there to catch them if they need it. But they've got enough growth within that opportunity to get themselves or their family to the next level. And I think there's nothing better than seeing people succeed with that. And somebody helped me. And I'm sure somebody helped you in your journey, Kelvin. And we've all got those people that we think about when people say that. But what I challenge all the listeners with today that are listening to this podcast, and I hope I'm not boring the building industry too much, is let's make sure that we are all giving people opportunities and we're there to mentor them and there to get them to the next level and not just holding everything in for ourselves, because that's not how we grow as organizations or as teams.
Regardless of what industry you're in, everybody has been given an opportunity to be where they are today. And I always say, if you enjoy what you do and you get up every day and you want to do it, your career is going to seem pretty short. And so for me, I get up every day and I enjoy this industry. I love what we do. And you want to find a way to do better than you did the day before, and find ways for your people to be able to do better than they did the day before, and to keep improving. I love the philosophy that you used of we opened the door, and the gentleman you were speaking about, it was wide open for him to take that open door and excel. And he did. And so it was his drive, his determination that got him to where he is today. And so I think, I can answer the next question that I had for you. When you're evaluating someone, are you looking at talent? Or are you looking at drive and personality? And I think talent's important, but it sounds like you're looking for someone with some determination and drive that's willing to prove themselves.
So in 2015, we were having a rough run in racing, and one of my closest mentors in this whole world, was one of the sailors at the time, and he was also actually the COO for that team we were with. And he's in my bridal party, and we've all got that person that they're not your blood family, but they're the people that literally treat you like family and give you all this advice. And he said to me, I need one thing from you. Every single day when you walk in that shed, I need you to be upbeat, and I need your personality to shine through the shed. Because he said, keeping an upbeat work environment is what's going to help us grind back from these bad situations and bad days. And we've all been in that organization with that bad manager that believes that the best way to deal with something is to come down on the floor and yell at everybody and then walk away. I challenge that person. We all make mistakes, and we had one recently, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, like, how do we do that? But I could walk downstairs and stand in front of 10 people and tell them all I'm disgusted with them. But what does that achieve? So instead, my approach to those situations, when I walked down, I said, look, guys, none of us like this. It's not good for us. And obviously we're all going to have to put in a little bit more over the next week to come back from this. But what I want you guys to all do is fill out these, we have breakdown reports on the boat that we use within the organization. I was like, I want everyone to fill out this report and tell me why each of you working on this project thinks this went wrong. And be as candid as you like, because we're not going to grow unless we grow together. And it was interesting to read that everybody has a slight different approach. But 3 of the guys came up to me who hadn't been with us for a long time and said, well, I've never been in an organization that when something's gone wrong, they've dealt with it like that. And I really appreciate that. And now I'm always thinking about this or that. And I'm like, that's exactly what we need to be doing. We need to make sure that when we have a problem, we identify it as quick as we can, and then we learn from it. Because that's what's going to make us better the next time we do that exact same role, or the next time one of those guys are in a conflict situation, whether it be at home or on the building site or just out in the community. They're not going to be the guy yelling at somebody. They're going to be the guy sitting down and trying to understand what's the problem at hand and how do we solve that better. And I think that's a real high performance, organization way to manage things. But I genuinely think that's a way that you build a team culture, that the team is built together to grow with longevity, as opposed to a team that's built for a short project.
So I started in the construction industry in '99, working for my father as a carpenter. And so one of the things that he is really good at is leading by example. And so he will show you, he will take that time. Now, being his son, I probably was on the blunt end of some of the stronger criticism, but it helped shape me and make me who I am today. And I appreciate his leadership and what he poured into me and helping me along the way and teaching me. It's so important in our organizations to take the time and do exactly what you're talking about. And that's come alongside your people, from getting to know them and teaching them and learning from each other's mistakes. We've all got lessons learned. We've all had ups and downs, and we've all got those success stories. But part of those success stories is those failures that we had along the way. So I know what accountability looks like in our organization and what that means to us. In your world, what does accountability look like? And how does that translate into the business world?
Yeah, I think it's, on a sporting team, the result is when you cross the line. And, a sailboat race is quite a tricky thing. There's so many multiple areas that can get it wrong. Is technology? Is the boat just fundamentally not fast enough? The system's not good enough and the maneuvers aren't working? Are the sailors not gelling together? Are the sailors not getting off the line? And I genuinely think, debriefing and understanding each decision that is made and thinking back to, okay, well, why did we make that decision? What are we going to do better next time is a very strong thing. When I think with the shop floor, I mean, there's so many different variants, shall I say, of that, because, there's the one, we've all got to be accountable to each other, to our teammates, okay? And that doesn't matter if you're carrying a piece of lumber together. You know that, accountability is if you're on the other end of that, you're carrying that together and you're communicating when you're putting that lumber down. As opposed to our guys in here, if you've got shifts or you're building a complex part, you need to be there for each other. And I think this is one of the reasons that I'm addicted to teams and team building and team environments and putting groups together. Is it took me a while to learn this when I was younger, but the more that I've got into it, I've worked out that, okay, throughout these organizations, you need every single level. You need that person that literally they're more than happy to just be painting drywall every day, and they're going to rock up on time and they're going to leave on time every day. And that's them because, their why is whatever they want to get out of work for. You also need that person that is super enthusiastic and moving too fast and needs to think a little bit more, but is moving across the organization because, his goals may be faster than needed, is to move up the rung, shall we say, in an organization. And then you need the guys that are managing all of those guys. And I think to make any big organization work, we need people at every level. And that's, I think, something that's really unique about the community that we're in here is I feel like we're a community that is all binding together to help people. And so as long as we're all setting up pipelines and opportunities to bring these people in, then we can build through and build out the next generation of our leaders locally.
Think about how important it is to have strong leadership, and we've been talking about that. Whether it's in a construction company for us to have strong leadership or in a sales team to have strong leadership, but you hit on something that's very important, is that we all have very unique roles that work together to make it happen. And how important that is to share with your team members that each and every one of them play a very important and integral role in the success of that team, right? Because while we may have good leadership, y'all got good leadership. If you don't have the team members that are playing their part to make it all come together, then none of us can be successful. So in our world, if we don't have the team members that's out there building the projects every day, we couldn't be successful in what we do. And if you don't have good sailors and you don't have good boat builders, you're obviously not going to be very successful at American Magic. And getting those team members to understand how important they are. Sometimes it's easier said than done, right? Because you feel the appreciation for them and you know how much you appreciate them. But in the business world, trying to communicate that to your team and make sure they understand how important they are and how much you appreciate them sometimes can be difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's always a line that, we all manage as leaders, because you need to have enough time to grow an organization, but you also need to have enough time to lead within the organization, if you know what I mean. And that's a push-pull. And you ask my wife, like I'm certainly addicted to what I do. And I think it's probably more my personality than the role. Like, I think if I was working at Publix, I'd somehow work out how to work 80 hours a week, as opposed to if I was doing what I am, because like I'm the kind of person that when I get into something, I'm all in on it. And I think that's a great trait within an organization, because the people that are like that. But it goes back to what we talked about at the start, is what are people's whys? My why when I started off was I just wanted to go as far in the sport of sailing as I could and travel the world. And, that changed, when I met my wife, Chrissy, in San Francisco, and then when we had Mila in Bermuda, and then when we had Kaya and Jordan after that in Colorado, it was like, now I look at it and I'm like, okay, I want to create more opportunity for these kids than I had. And I want to make sure that I'm raising good kids and they're growing up in a much different world than I grew up in. And I try to drag it back. And this is one of the reasons why I feel so blessed that we get to live in Florida, and raise our kids in Florida, raise them somewhere that, they can go to a school that they feel safe, go to a beach and run on a beach, ride their bikes in a park, all these amazing things that we're able to do here. And I want to make sure that, I'm putting them in a position so that they end up being good people. And, my wife says sometimes I'm a little bit hard on our children, but ultimately that's our job as parents, to raise kids so that, when they turn 18, 19, they know how to stand on their own 2 feet. And life isn't just about, what mum and dad could do for them. They're making their own path. And as you said with your own father, like if you can't take your dad telling you, how are you going to go when you get out there in the real world? And so I think, so much just comes back to good values and good family values and good values for the organization that you work for.
Father of three, I think about it often. I think about mentorship and leading at home. Leading an organization is very different than leading at home, right? But what's the next steps for my children and creating an environment and continue to help create a community that's going to be great for them to possibly be able to stay here and build a life here. Mentorship is something in our industry that we struggle with from time to time, because when you think about skilled trades, there's a lot of programs out there to teach it. But oftentimes, what we don't see is enough mentorship and or programs to help kind of craft the next generation of field managers, superintendents, foremen, the project management world. So there's a little bit of a gap there in our industry. We talk about this all the time, just how important mentorship is from the guys that's been doing it for 30, 40 years, just to share their insights and their life lessons with the next generation that's coming up. I know we're getting close on time, and I want to ask you one last question before we move off of leadership. You've made some decisions in high pressure situations. Let's talk about that for a minute and what that looks like, whether you're making a decision to move an entire organization from New York to Pensacola, Florida, or you're competing in the America's Cup. What advice do you have for making decisions in high pressure situations?
It's an interesting one, because I feel like the more you do it, the better you become at it. And I love to look at data, and I love to understand the facts, and I love to hear what people are thinking. But sometimes you just got to go with your gut, and you really do, because I think as long as your intentions are always about the organization more than any one person, and you can honestly, wake up and look at yourself in the mirror every day and say that, I think you're going to make good decisions. Let's remember, pressure is a privilege. And so I'll never complain to people about, okay, all these tough decisions I need to make, at work every day, or in my home life, because, I quite often say to my wife, like, some of these decisions that we're making are decisions that I dreamed about making 22 years ago. And so I would say, to anyone grappling with it, make sure that you look at the facts of whatever you're trying to do or achieve, whatever that decision is. And then don't be afraid to go with your gut, because quite often your gut will lead you down the right path.
Pressure is a privilege. I like that. I'm writing that down. I'm going to make a note of that one and remember that. I like that. All right. Final thought. 44 years old, 6'2", maybe north of 250. Where do I fit in on American Magic team if I decide to make a career change?
I think
building maintenance, water boy, what is it?
Well, I've actually got Pat lined up. I haven't told Ryan or you, Kelvin, but I've actually got Pat's retirement job lined up as building maintenance here. And I'm actually trying to get him and Danny as a BOGO deal, actually, but let's see how I go there. But I think when everyone in the local community looks at American Magic and thinks, okay, how does that fit for me? I genuinely think managing people across the board is very similar. Now, understanding the specifics of the task is different, but project management is project management. And whether you're running, an org chart to put a building together like I'm sitting in today, or you're managing a race team, like ultimately you're trying to do the same thing. Okay, you're trying to get a tangible product out of a bunch of people. And yes, there's the knowledge in the product, but so much of that is how you deal with people and how you manage people. And the better you do that, the better result you're going to have. And I always challenge people with this. I'm like, guys, it doesn't matter if you're here or you're working at Publix or you're working at the Shell gas station. We're all managing people to an extent. And so my biggest one, with people is like, treat people the way you'd like to be treated and treat them with respect. And if you do that every single day, you can go a long way. And they're the exact people we're looking for at American Magic. So if it doesn't work out for Danny and Pat, absolutely there's a great opportunity for you here, Kelvin, and we'd love to have you. But I got to talk to Ryan, because I don't want Ryan to think I'm trying to take everyone out of the office.
I love it. It's great. So what you're saying is you could get me on building maintenance, but I'm too old and too large for the sale team, is what you're telling me.
You might have a little bit too much height, but I grew up wanting to play basketball, and I've got the opposite problem to you, Kelvin. So never give away that height, okay? Enjoy it, mate. You can't hide at an event like I can, though.
I did play basketball, baseball, and played a little bit of golf when I was younger. But as you could see, I'm in construction, so none of those worked out as a career. So that'll tell you how good I was. Tyson, I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for your insights. I've really enjoyed it. It's great stuff. Love the team sport. Love the team sport conversation. Let's get back together soon.
Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I hope I haven't put the building industry to sleep today, and I look forward to crossing paths in the future.
Absolutely. Take care, man.